All right, RJ, the day we've been waiting for is finally here. All 30 NHL teams have submitted their protection lists, and it's given us our first solid look at what the inaugural Seattle Kraken roster is going to look like. Now, today we're going to go through each and every team's list and talk about who we think the Kraken should draft. But real quick, I just want to mention that this is a sort of simulcast for us, as this marks our first ever Emerald City Hockey podcast episode. For those of you on YouTube who've been following us, first of all, thanks for all the support. We really appreciate it. But I also wanted to let you know that we can now be found on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and will be on Google Podcasts soon. As for those of you who are listening to this podcast and this is your first time with us, hi, first of all, and welcome to the Emerald City Hockey family. If you like this podcast, know that you can find tons of content from us on our YouTube channel, Emerald City Hockey. Okay, that's enough from me, RJ. Why don't you let us know about the Anaheim Ducks?
Right, and starting off the protection lists, we have the Ducks, who went with the 7-3-1 protection option. Now, there was some talk they might go, 8 skaters to protect 4 and 4, but they ended up wanting to protect more forwards, and that leaves the Kraken a lot of options on defense. So the Ducks have protected Nicolas Deslauriers, Max Jones, Isaac Lundestrom, Ricard Raquel, Jacob Silfverberg, Sam Steele, and Troy Terry as their forwards. And the 3 defensemen are Cam Fowler, Hampus Lindholm, and Josh Manson. And, of course, John Gibson is the protected goalie. So that does leave some interesting options exposed, particularly on the blue line. Dillon, is there one of these defensemen that you might want to select over the others?
It's got to be Hayden Fleury, right? Like, he to me is the guy who screams out of all the unprotected players at any position. Hayden Fleury really is the one that stands out to me. I thought about Jacob Larson for a sec, but after looking at them both, Hayden Fleury's only a year older at 24, Larson's 23, but just over the course of their careers, and then last year with Anaheim, Fleury he's just outplayed Larson. So in my mind, Fleury should be the pick. Not only do I think he'd be a really good defenseman for Seattle, but he should also have a lot of trade value if they decide they want to flip him for something else.
Definitely, and the Ducks just gave up assets at the most recent trade deadline to bring Fleury in, which is why I'm surprised that he's exposed. But the Kraken will happily take advantage of that. He was a Hurricanes draft pick, so I think Ron Francis already kind of has the book on him, and I do think that's the direction they're going to go here.
Agreed.
Yeah. So moving on to the Arizona Coyotes, and yesterday was a tough day for the Kraken looking at the Coyotes protection list because Adin Hill, of course, moved to the San Jose Sharks. Who can protect him? We had Hill as the projected pick from the Coyotes for a long time, but of course that won't be happening. So looking at the Coyotes protection list, they've gone 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and a goalie like the Ducks. Their 7 forwards are Lawson Krause, Christian Dvorak, Connor Garland, Clayton Keller, Phil Kessel, Johan Larsson, and Nick Schmaltz. Their 3 defensemen are Kyle Capobianco, Jacob Chikrin, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and of course Darcy Kemper in net. So it's kind of slim pickings here from Arizona. Is there anyone that stands out to you on this list?
There's literally only one person left available that I can say really anything about why I might want the Kraken to take him, and that's Michael Bunting. And that's only because he had 10 goals in 21 games last year. He's only 25, so it's not like he's that old, but to me, to have that kind of scoring potential on a wing, maybe he has some middle 6 upside on a team where, he should see plenty of playing time potentially. I don't know. It's hard. There's just like no one. There's just no one.
I did like Bunting's game watching him last season. I mean, he went to the net, went to the right areas. You think that 26% shooting percentage is going to be sustainable?
Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, you can never say never, of these guys, the only other one that maybe Dryden Hunt. I mean, he put up good numbers in the AHL this year, and I don't know. I mean, you're going to have to just take a chance here. I don't know.
It's slim pickings as far as players you'd want. There's virtually no one on here who has any sort of trade value. If you were to take them and try to flip them to somebody else, it's really rough. all the name brand guys on here, they're all guys with ridiculous contracts. I mean, that's why Arizona has them, is just to reach the cap floor, and I don't think Seattle needs to bring on those contracts to hit the cap floor. I think that money's better spent elsewhere. So
Yeah,
it'll be
no,
interesting.
There'll be better opportunities to spend money if you're going to spend money here. So moving on to a team that actually has some good options available, the Boston Bruins. They've also gone 7-3-1. They protected Patrice Bergeron, Charlie Coyle, Jake DeBrusk, Trent Frederick, Brad Marchand, David Pasternak, Craig Smith, Brandon Carlo, Matt Grzelcyk, Charlie McAvoy, and Dan Vladar in goal. So from the Bruins, we've had Jeremy Lauzon as our projected pick for a while now. Looking at the protection list, I mean, there's not really any surprises as far as who's left available. Are we still going with that, or maybe Nick Ritchie?
Nick Ritchie was a little bit of a surprise for me, and I do think that he's worth looking at. He's kind of like an old school player in that he's a true power forward kind of guy. I'd like to see more scoring out of him. Like the goals have never really come from him that was expected. He was a 10th overall pick by Anaheim back in the day. I, I don't know. I still like Lauzon. There's a couple depth guys that I like, but I don't like them as the expansion pick. Someone like a Curtis Lazar or Andre Kasha, but yeah, I think Lauzon's probably who they should go after. 23-year-old defenseman who's shown he can hang and eat up some minutes. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yep, agreed. I think Richie wouldn't be a bad pick, but again, Lauzon, we got to stick with that.
Yeah.
So moving on to the Buffalo Sabres. They made a move. Jeff Skinner waived his move clause, which helps them out a lot. They had kind of 3 forwards to protect and only 2 forward spots left to protect them. And with Skinner waiving the no move clause, that helps them out a bunch. No, the Kraken will not be taking Jeff Skinner. That's not going to happen. So their protected list, they've got Rasmus Asplund, Anders Bjork, Jack Eichel, Casey Middlestat, Victor Olofsson, Sam Reinhart, Tage Thompson, Rasmus Dahlin, Henry Jokiharju, Rasmus Ristolainen, and Linus Ullmark, who is a UFA, but they didn't really have any other goalies worth protecting. So looking at the Sabres exposed list, you got a lot of undesirable money here with Skinner, Kyle Okposo. Maybe they'll try and swing a side deal with the Kraken to take one of those guys. I wouldn't do it if I was Ron Francis, but who do you like out of these guys for the pick?
This is like Arizona all over again. I don't know. I'm really struggling here. Again, there's like some depth defenseman names that are interesting, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Will Borgen stands out. He's a defenseman. He's only 24 years old. He played only 10 games with the Sabres this season because he had an injury that kept him out the rest of the season. But in those 10 games, he looked pretty good. I think he might be worth a shot as the pick here. I mean, certainly with not a whole lot of other options, but I think Will Borgen could be an underrated pick if the Kraken want to go that way.
Yeah. I mean, he was one of the defensemen I was thinking of. It's just, yeah, Arizona and Buffalo are the two that really stand out as just, they're rough.
I mean, as you would expect, we know.
Yeah, I mean, big
where these
surprise,
franchises are.
All right.
So, moving on to future division rival, Calgary Flames. They've also gone with the 7-3-1 protection option, protecting Michael Backlund, Dylan Dubé, Johnny Gaudreau, Elias Lindholm, Andrew Mangiapane, Sean Monahan, Matthew Tkachuk, Rasmus Anderson, Noah Hannafin, Chris Tanev, and goalie Jacob Markstrom. So from the Flames, seems like there's an obvious name that stands out. It's been mentioned by a lot of the media. It's their captain, Mark Giordano. It seems like that could be a slam dunk pick for the Kraken to make. I mean, would you have any reservations about it given the cap hit?
Not really. I mean, if I'm remembering right, the contract doesn't have too much term left on it.
Just
Um,
the 1 year.
yeah, then why not? You're gonna need someone who can be a leader in that locker room, who can help bring together a team of a bunch of guys who have never played together before. It's not too much money. 6, 7, 5 isn't like this unbearable burden of a cap hit, especially year one when you're going to have a ton of cap space as an expansion team. So I like Mark Giordano. If the Kraken decide to have a captain year one, he obviously becomes one of the guys you look at as being such. The only other name that kind of interests me is also on defense, and that would be Oliver Shylington. But we've talked about him a couple months ago during one of our live Q&As. He's a guy that he still has a lot of potential when you look at him, but he's kind of struggled to put it all together so far. So yeah, I like Giordano myself.
Right. And Shillington, he's a player you could probably acquire separately if you wanted to go that route. And just from a value standpoint, Giordano is the clear pick. And he also has, value around the league. So even if the Kraken don't see him as a fit for their initial roster for whatever reason, they could flip him to another team. I'm sure there would be interest. Elliot Friedman has speculated that maybe they could even eat some salary on that last year and trade him to the Oilers, even though they got Duncan Keith. So maybe that is no longer in play for them. But I'm sure there are other teams that would be wanting to bring him in.
Yeah, I agree. He should have. If you want to move him and you don't want to hold on to him, there will definitely be a market there for him.
Yeah. So next, a team that has a lot of good options for the Kraken, the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, I don't want to take too much of a victory lap here on behalf of both of us, but I do remember, for months we were saying they're going to protect Shea over Jake Bean. Look at all the minutes he gets. Look at what he means to the team. They're in win now mode. I think they're going to value him higher. And we did get a lot of backlash on that. No, they're going to protect Bean. He's got more upside. Protection list is out. Brady Shea, of course, protected over Jake Bean. So I will say we did see that one coming.
Yeah.
And, of course, that leaves Jake Bean exposed. And, he'd be my choice as the pick. I mean, I don't know about you. There are some interesting options as well. Nito Niederreiter, a surprise player exposed. Does that tempt you to go the other way?
He surprised me. What worries me is he only has 1 year left on his contract. And I have no idea what he's going to be looking at money-wise. His current contract pays him 5.25, and he's one of those guys that you could see the Kraken taking, and he's a top 6 winger for them. And maybe he puts up a lot of numbers or whatever, and then all of a sudden you got to negotiate with him, and he's going to want a really big figure contract, which I like him a lot as a player. But if he was to come out and say he wants like $6 million a year over like 5 years or something, I don't think you can justify giving him that kind of contract if you're Ron Francis. That, and I still like Jake Bean's upside. Again, you're talking about a fairly high first round pick, a guy who just hasn't gotten a lot of opportunity to show himself off in Carolina because of how deep their defense has been. But we've talked about him before. He's like the prototypical power play quarterback in my mind, and I think that'll be something that Seattle could use year one.
Absolutely. I think he's got the potential to be the Kraken's best defenseman in 3 years or so. He's definitely got that upside. And I agree with you on Niederreiter. He's going to command a big contract when that deal is up. I think that's one of the reasons the Hurricanes have exposed him too. Tom Dundon's hesitant to pay players, kind of beyond what he thinks they're worth. And I think he can see that coming as well. Maybe hoping the Kraken kind of take him off their hands for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. So next we have the Chicago Blackhawks, who also went with the 7-3-1 protection option, protecting Henrik Borgstrom, Alex DeBrincat, Brandon Hagel, David Kampf, Patrick Kane, Dylan Strome, Jonathan Taves, Caleb Jones, Connor Murphy, Riley Stillman, and then goalie Kevin Lankinen. So from the Blackhawks, not a ton of options here. The one surprise, we knew with that last protection spot, it was kind of a toss-up between maybe Camp, maybe Adam Gaudette. They ended up choosing to go Camp. Is there anyone here that stands out to you?
Gaudette, as you mentioned, Brett Connolly, just as one of those energy guys. He's obviously got an injury history. He's had that since before he even got into the league. But as you're watching the playoffs and you're seeing guys like Barclay Goodrow and Blake Coleman and Joel Armia and these kind of depth bottom six energy forwards that can go out there, they hustle, they forecheck, they do all that stuff that you want to see come, May, June, in a traditional schedule, I should say, July this year. I just think Brett Conley has shown that he can be that guy when healthy. So he's someone, I'm sure we're going to talk about it plenty over the next couple of weeks. Seattle is in a very, very weak division. They're going to have a very good chance at making the playoffs year one. And I think maybe you want to look at guys like Conley to, maybe help you steal a round or two once you get into the playoffs.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't really thought about Connolly much, but as a depth forward, he could be a good addition. I mean, my choice out of this group is on defense, Nikita Zadorov. I mean, he is one of those big defenders who can kind of grind you down over the course of a playoff series. He's not afraid to play on the edge really physically, and that's another thing in the playoffs that you need, and I think that's where he's going to provide his real value. He's had some so regular seasons, but I think get him on a playoff team and he's going to provide you a lot of value. So that's probably the direction I'd go here. The only difficulty there is he's an RFA. He's going to need another contract. It's probably going to be over $3 million, and I don't know that that's going to fit with what the Kraken are doing.
Yeah. And as you said, he's also someone you can just, eat up 20 minutes a night. He's proven that he can do that, and that can be valuable if, I think the Kraken are going to have a deep defense, but as injuries take place over the course of a year, it's always nice to know that you have someone that you can slot up into a top four position if needed.
Yeah, no, for sure. Moving on to the Colorado Avalanche. And so this is a fun one. They did some pre-expansion draft posturing. Unfortunately, they traded defenseman Ryan Graves to the New Jersey Devils right before the protection lists were due. So the Ryan Graves dream is done as far as the pick from the Avs. And I will say Joe Sakic did a good job positioning his team well for the expansion draft. A lot of the names we were looking at, are not going to be available. No Kadri, no Jost. Even Logan O'Connor did onto the protection list. So, looking at the exposed players, you've got Jonas Donskoy, you've got even Jacob McDonald on defense might be worth a look. Of course, one big name stands out, and that's Gabriel Landeskog. Of course, he's a UFA, but the Kraken will be free to talk to him during the exclusive negotiating window, and it does seem like he and the Avs are pretty far apart on contract negotiations, and he might be willing to move elsewhere. Is there any chance the Kraken could grab him here?
Maybe. It depends on if Colorado's going to allow them to potentially talk to him beforehand, or if they're going to have to take him with their expansion pick. It's interesting because I think if you're Landeskog, you obviously really want to stay in Colorado. He's made that pretty clear. But if you're going to be moving on, you probably want to be going somewhere where you can win a cup, and will he view Seattle as a place where he can potentially do that in the next couple seasons? And that'll be really interesting. We think that they're going to be a playoff team. I don't know that they're going to be a Stanley Cup final team year one. I think that could, is most likely a stretch. Obviously, what Vegas did was exceptional. I don't want to put that kind of expectation on the Kraken, but 2-3 years from now, could they be? Absolutely. Why not, right? So Landeskog is interesting. Another one, not to mention but I also think if you're going to sign Landeskog, you're signing him long-term, and he's going to stay there. One of the other interesting UFAs would be Brandon Saad, who has, as we know, a pretty big market this year. And so it might be interesting. The Kraken could work out a deal with someone where they do a sign and trade with Saad. I could see potentially as well. Otherwise, if you're looking at staying away from picking a UFA, I think Donskoy is the guy for me. He's good depth scoring, and he's always shown up in the playoffs. Every time we see him in the playoffs, he's there. Um, I like that, and I think that's something that they're gonna pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean Donskoy is a great guy you can plug anywhere in the lineup, especially in the playoffs. He's not a play driver, we know that, but you can put him, in a bottom six role, or you can put him in some of your most talented players. And he's got the skill to kind of hang with them and to be creative and build off of that. So I wouldn't mind seeing Donskoy as the pick. Certainly with O'Connor protected,
Yeah.
that's the other guy I wanted to go, but I think Donskoy is probably the guy if you're looking to avoid taking UFA. But I think they should definitely have those conversations with Landeskog, with Saad, and just kind of see what the number is. But it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing with the pick from Colorado.
Yep.
So next is the Columbus Blue Jackets. Again, went 7-3-1. They protected Cam Atkinson, Oliver Bjorkstrand, Boone Jenner, Patrick Laine, Gustav Nyquist, Eric Robinson, Jack Roslovic, Vladislav Gavrikov, Seth Jones, Zach Werenski, and Jonas Korpisalo. So obvious big name, elephant in the room missing from the protection list in Columbus, and that is Max Domi. The news broke yesterday that they were not going to protect him. He's got 1 year left on his deal at $5.3 million. Should the Kraken go for it?
I think so. I mean, he's the only guy I look at on this list of available guys that I get excited about. I know he's kind of got a back and forth past. Arizona obviously drafted him in the first round. I think they were expecting him to come in and be, one of these kind of small, skilled forwards, and he wasn't quite that for them, so they trade him to Montreal. Montreal thinks he's going to be more physical and kind of be another Brandon Gallagher for them, but he wasn't quite that either. So I just think a lot of everything for Max Domi has just been kind of figuring out what he is, but I think we now know what he is, and that's a middle six winger who's going to be able to come in and score around 20 goals a season. He's going to have a physical element to his game, and I just think that's going to be valuable for the Kraken. The contract's a lot for what you're probably going to get from him, but I don't think negotiating on an extension or looking at re-signing him next year, the number's going to be as robust as it is now. And so I'm not too worried about it. That and year one they are going to have to try to get to $60 million to hit the cap floor anyway. So if you can take on a couple contracts for these guys, knowing you're going to need to get to that number, and you're not going to have to be paying them past year one, much like with Mark Giordano, I think it's an acceptable thing to do.
Yeah, no, and you hit on a good point. I don't mind taking a little extra salary on a guy like Domi or Giordano if it's just for 1 year. I mean, in year one, you're going to have a lot of room, you're going to have a lot of flexibility, and beyond that, it's fine. Just don't take term. You can take salary if you don't take term, and I think we're going to see that later on as we're looking at our picks here and what we would do. I don't mind taking the salary here. Domi, the pick just screams low risk, high reward. The risk is low because it's just 1 year. The reward very high. This is a guy who, although I don't think he'll match that again. He put up 72 points at a season 3 years ago, and he's only 26.
Yeah.
So we know he can do that. For that kind of reward, just to take a 1 year gamble, it's definitely worth it in my book. And he had just had surgery, so that is an issue. He will probably miss the start of the season, but I mean, so what? I mean, the Kraken I think can afford to wait on that. And if he looks good, and you don't see him long term either, you could flip him at the deadline too.
Yeah.
I think Max Domi has to be the pick here.
All right. Looking ahead at Dallas, what do we got?
Not much, I will say. Not much at all. The Stars, I mean, it was already looking like slim pickings from the Stars. And then Jason Dickinson was kind of the clear, odd man out that looked like the clear pick. And of course, they trade him to the Vancouver Canucks yesterday, leaving just about no one. I mean, also Ben Bishop waives his no move clause. leaving Anton Khudobin as the protected goalie. Would you take a chance on Bishop?
No.
Agreed. I would not either. I mean, given that injury history, and this also tells me that they probably don't think he'll be ready for the start of the season. And yeah, the Kraken aren't going to go there. Is there anyone who stands out here for you? Because for me, there really isn't, aside from, I guess, some UFAs like Alexiak. But anyone under contract that looks better? I mean...
No, not really. There's names that are interesting to me. Cagliano is a player who I've loved forever. I don't know that he makes a ton of sense for the Kraken. And again, he's a UFA. It's not even like he's under contract. Mark Pysyk is a defenseman who I've liked as a depth defenseman for a really long time. Again, though, not under contract. I don't know what you're going to be looking at for him. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, for the projected roster, I'm going with Joel L'Esperance, just because he's under contract for next year. That helps you hit that 20 contract mark. But I just don't think we really have anything worth talking about from Dallas. So let's move on then. Next, the Detroit Red Wings. And they've protected Tyler Bertuzzi, Adam Ernie, Robbie Fabry, Dylan Larkin, Michael Rasmussen, Giovanni Smith, Jakub Vrana, Philip Roenick, Nick Leddy, Gustav Lindstrom, and then Thomas Greiss in net. So not too many surprises on this protected list. Nemesnikov, I did think they would probably protect, but they chose Giovanni Smith instead. On defense, that last spot was a bit of a toss-up. They went with Lindstrom. I think that's a fine move. That does leave Troy Stetcher and Dennis Chalowski on the outside defense-wise. But, the Red Wings are another one of those basement teams. Is there anyone who looks all that attractive to you here?
Nemesnikov, like you said, is kind of the guy that stands out. I thought Bobby Ryan played really well for them last year. He's going to be a UFA, but maybe, you can talk him into signing a one-year deal at a reasonable number, just to kind of have a little bit of experience in scoring. But yeah, I mean, it's just like some of the other teams we've talked about. There's a couple of these teams that are just bad teams, and the pickings are slim. And at the end of the day, Kraken are going to be drafting 30 guys in the expansion draft, but you're only going to have 22 roster spots, right? And so, I think this is, again, one of those teams where you're probably drafting someone for the AHL.
Yeah. Or one name I do want to mention, though, is Troy Stetcher. He's a BC native. He'd come back closer to home. And I thought he did well playing for the Red Wings this season. Probably not a lot of eyes on him, given that the Red Wings were pretty much out of contention all year. But Stetcher might be a good, bottom pairing defenseman. That's the direction they want to go. But like you said, there's not a whole lot. All right, so next we have the Edmonton Oilers, who again went with the 7-3. I'll just let you know when the team doesn't go with the 7-3 one protection option. They protected Josh Archibald, Leon Draisaitl, Zach Kassian, Connor McDavid, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Jesse Puljujarvi, Kyler Yamamoto, Ethan Bear, Duncan Keith, Darnell Nurse, and Stuart Skinner in goal. So the Oilers making that trade, Keith for Caleb Jones. That deal, they just swap out each other's protection spots. So not a whole lot of surprises here. The one that I didn't predict, but I'm not surprised to see, is Zach Kassian protected over Tyler Benson. Mm-hmm. I thought they would expose Kassian just because the Kraken wouldn't take that contract. But I guess he's that important to what they're doing in Edmonton that he's worth protecting.
Yeah. I have a question for you. How much do you think Tyson Barrie's performance last year was because he was playing so much with Draisaitl and McDavid?
A lot. Okay. A lot. And I mean, we know what the deal with Tyson Barrie is. He's the only defenseman to lead the NHL in defensive scoring and not receive a single Norris vote.
Right.
So I do think people around the league see that. I think he's a fine defenseman to have and provide something offensively, but given that he's going to hit the open market, I just don't think he's going to be worth what some team is going to go in and pay him. So, if you're Ron Francis, I think you want to have that conversation and talk to him, but you don't want to go above your internal number that you've kind of already decided.
Yeah, so then the second person that stands out to me is, could Seattle be the place where Adam Larson finally figures it all out?
I think it could if he wants to go there, but I really do feel like they have an extension for Larson that's in the drawer right now, and they're just waiting for the expansion draft to be over. With the Keith trade, they could not afford to re-sign Larson before the expansion draft. I would have exposed him and given him a free extension to Seattle. So while I think it would be good, you again want to talk to him, but I just think that extension's in the drawer.
Yeah. Then, I don't have much else from this team. Tyler Ennis just as a depth guy, who's responsible. I don't know.
Yeah, Dominic Cahoon or Tyler Benson, they're both on the younger side. Maybe there's some upside there, but yeah, not a whole lot more to talk about with Edmonton. So we move on to the one team here where the pick is all but confirmed. So it's not even really worth discussing the protection list because we know who the pick's going to be. So from the Florida Panthers, the Kraken are going to sign and then select goalie Chris Drieger. So what do you think, Dillon, about that choice in net? I think he's probably the odds-on favorite right now to start that first game that the Kraken play in October.
Yeah, and he's earned it. I mean, he was fantastic last year, stepping up when Florida needed him. He's a big reason why they finished second in that extremely tough division. And I'm really excited that he's going to be a member of the Seattle Kraken.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the goalie that I was hoping that they would target, especially when it was rumored that he was looking at $3.5 million as a cap hit, over the contract. I mean, that's an absolute steal. I thought he was going to command at least 4.5 on the open market.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see. We don't know what the cap number is going to be, but it looks like it'll be a steal. I mean, Drieger he's played in the HL. He's played even in the ECHL as recently as like 2 years ago. But he's worked his way into showing that he's ready for a starting role in the NHL. A lot of goalies are late bloomers. He's 27, but he's got a career .926 save percentage in the NHL. He's ready. I mean, put him in net for the first game.
Exactly.
Yeah. So next we have the Los Angeles Kings, and their protection list. I don't know. It's a little different than what I would have done. They protected at forward Elias Anderson, Victor Arvidsson, Dustin Brown, Alex Iafallo, Adrian Kempe, Anze Kopitar, and Trevor Moore. On defense, it's Drew Doughty, Matt Roy, and Sean Walker. And then in goal is Calvin Peterson. So I would have done things a little differently. First on defense, I'm surprised they exposed Cale Clegg.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, he's only 23. And to give up on him at this point, I'm just surprised that they would do that, given that that Matt Roy, Sean Walker, I don't know, they're nothing worth exposing a prospect like Clegg over, in my opinion. But so he's an option at forward. I was surprised to see Trevor Moore protected, even though he is from my hometown of Thousand Oaks, California. Shout out to Thousand Oaks, but good for him. Of course, that does leave Austin Wagner exposed. So maybe my prophecy is about to be fulfilled here. Ball's in your court, Ron Francis. You can take him now. Carl Grunstrom, Andreas Athanasiou. He's a player that's a lot like Austin Wagner. If they want to go a different route, who would you take? Yeah,
I was just gonna say I would lean him over Austin Wagner. Personally, I just think there's a little bit more of a proven track record. For what these guys are, there's more of a proven track record. So I would lean that direction, but I do think they should consider Cale Clegg.
Yeah, I think Clegg is as much as I like Athanasiou and of course Austin Wagner, I would go Cale Clegg here.
Yeah, I think reasonably you're expecting him probably to spend, given the defensive options Seattle's going to have, he'll probably spend a year in the AHL. Year one, he'll be in Charlotte, but I think that's probably better for him. He'll get tons of playing time there, and then he can come into the Kraken next season and hopefully be great.
Yeah. So thank you, Kings, for exposing Cale Clegg. Moving on to the Minnesota Wild, who, we were excited about this pick for a while, looking that, well, they've got to do something about Matt Dumba being exposed, right? I mean, this can't happen. And then it really came down to the wire. And, of course, then the Wild take drastic action, buying out both Zach Parise and Ryan Suter, which fixed pretty much all of their expansion draft problems. But at what cost?
A lot of dead cap space.
Yeah, that's a lot of dead cap space. Those buyouts are going to hurt. But we're not worried about that right now. So we'll look at our options. So with the protection list, they were able to go 7-3-1, protecting Joel Eriksson Ek, Kevin Fiala, Marcus Foligno, Jordan Greenway, Ryan Hartman, Nico Sturm, and Matt Zuccarello at forward, Jonas Brodin, Matt Dumba, and Jared Spurgeon on D, and then Cam Talbot in goal. And so it wasn't a foregone conclusion which goalie they were going to protect. You have Cam Talbot, who's the older veteran goalie, played really well for them in the playoffs this year in their 7-game series against the Golden Knights. But then you have Kaapo Kähkönen, who is younger goalie, maybe more upside. I've heard reports that they kind of view him as a career backup. They don't think he's going to be a starter for them long term. But I don't think that we necessarily know that about him yet. I think there's still room to develop and room to maybe be a starter in the NHL. How tempting is that to you for the Kraken? Would you look at Kähkönen or maybe more a defenseman like Carson Soucy?
It's a little tempting, but as we kind of just talked about, we're getting Chris Drieger. I think there's going to be other good goaltending options for the Kraken that are going to be available. I think we can lean somewhere else. I like a Victor Rask personally. Kind of fitting in with the theme. I think he's someone who can play center, which is kind of the one forward position that all along we know might be a sticking point. Only 1 year left on that contract, so it fits with our theme of you're bringing a guy in and you only got to worry about paying him for the 1 year. I just think if you can get someone like that to help plug a gap year one, I think it's worth it.
Interesting. Given the contract, I didn't really have him on the radar for this pick, but I think they might be able to get the Wild to throw, to give them something to take Rask. I think the Wild would love to get that contract off the books for this year, especially with having to re-sign, Kaprizov and maybe a bigger move they want to make in the offseason. That could be a way to go, certainly with a side deal. I like Kähkönen. It's his numbers. He's got a limited sample size in the NHL. He's played 29 games, only a .904 save percentage. So, it's, I don't know, a little bit of an eye test. With goalies, they can be weird. I still think that he'd be a good dart throw to make. But you're right. Maybe there are better options. So moving on, speaking of goaltending, moving on to the Montreal Canadiens, who leave the Kraken with a very interesting decision in net. I could go through the protection list, but really the question is, do the Kraken take Carey Price? Carey Price, of course, agreeing to waive his no-move clause to protect his backup, Jake Allen. And this is probably the biggest question surrounding the Kraken expansion draft, at least in terms of how much fans are talking about it. All the hype over that. Carey Price, leading the Habs to the Stanley Cup final this year, and now he is exposed, and the Kraken, if they want, could take him and make him their goalie. So, Dillon, should they do it?
No. And, I'm going to give an example, and that's going to be Jordan Binnington of the St. Louis Blues. So Here's a goalie, gets hot, they go on a playoff run, they win the Stanley Cup, but guess what? That's a lot of extra games on a goalie. We've seen it with guys like Matt Murray with the Penguins, back-to-back years, deep playoff runs. It wears those guys out. Carey Price is, 33. There's no reason to think that that was easy on him, on his body. I don't know that he could replicate it, next season by any means. And then, just the fact that you're looking at 5 years at 10.5 per is just extraordinary. And I really don't know how great the trade market is going to be if you were to take Price and then retain some form of salary and trade him somewhere. I don't know that the asset's going to be worth it.
Also, he still has that no move clause, so it's got to be something
Yeah.
he'll agree to as well.
Yeah.
So you certainly can't count on that.
Right. So I just think it's not worth it. I'm wary of taking goaltenders after deep playoff runs, especially guys of his age, and especially guys that you're going to have to be committed to for so long at such a high cost.
Yeah. So first thing, I'm gonna be no fun and give my opinion on this, and then I'm gonna be devil's advocate here, and get a little fun with it. So no, the Kraken should absolutely not do this. It would be a giant mistake. I mean, that contract at 10.5 mil for 5 more years, it's one of the worst in the NHL, and I think Price knows it, Bergevin knows it, everyone knows it. It's just not worth picking him up. He's been, Price hasn't even been all that good for 3 of the last 4 seasons. You're just looking at like a 3-series sample size, and he wasn't that good in the Cup final. I would not do this. As much fun as it is to to talk about, having the star power like Carey Price, it's just not worth it. And I know he would, help sell jerseys and whatnot, but winning helps a lot more than that. And I think he would be a detriment to that, having that much cap space tied up in him. But playing devil's advocate, Dillon. Now, I know you talked Jordan Binnington. I know you talked about Matt Murray. Those guys, yes, they got fatigued, after these long playoff runs, and they just don't look like themselves anymore. But let's talk about another guy, Marc-Andre Fleury. Mm-hmm. So Fleury, had some long playoff runs, has played a lot of games, had been playing like since he was 18 coming into the league. A lot of games under his belt, and of course was selected by the Golden Knights to be their franchise goalie coming out of the expansion draft. And you're thinking, maybe this isn't a good idea. He's on the older side. And look at him now. He's 36, just had a Vezina Trophy season. And the only explanation, he's defied all the aging curves, is just that he's a superstar. He's a Hall of Fame goalie. And, he's an exception. And so, while you think, looking at his age, Price 33, goalies just don't do that. But only Hall of Fame caliber goalies even have a chance of doing that. But is that not Carey Price? Could he not be that guy?
Yeah, one of the differences is, right before he went to Vegas, Marc-Andre Fleury, he essentially was the backup in Pittsburgh. He had a couple years where he was not the playoff goaltender. He hardly played in the playoffs. He was getting extended off seasons. That last year in Pittsburgh, he only played 38 games. So, that's very different than Carey Price would be coming directly off of it. So, again, that worries me. Yeah.
Price played 25 games this season.
Right, but then he had that deep playoff run that is even more exaggerated this year because of the way the schedule works out. You're going to then be talking about a guy that you're going to be playing, potentially 35 plus games come October, just a couple months after this deep playoff run where he was leaned on heavily. It wasn't like, he was in net while they coasted to the Stanley Cup Finals. He had to do everything in his power to get there. I worry about the emotional toll that also would have taken on him. I think we obviously saw that with a guy like Shea Weber. But Carey Price was also very emotional after that. The thoughts that maybe, you gave it everything you could because this was your best chance to potentially ever win a Stanley Cup and you didn't quite get there. How well do you recover from that emotionally? That's something only he knows. if even he knows, right? That's a big question mark for players. So I don't know. I see the argument, but that contract is just so big. I just don't think it's the wise thing to do, and I don't think it's worth it to Seattle. I don't think Ron Francis is going to view all that other stuff as the upside.
Right. I think he'll come more from the mindset that of our mindset where it's just not worth it. Then he's not one to get caught up in the excitement of a big name or a superstar or something to the detriment of the team and his cap situation. So while it's fun to think about, I don't think Carey Price is coming to the Kraken. I guess we should look at, since that's the case, we should probably look at other options.
Right. So to me, they obviously have a lot of UFA guys that they left unprotected. I love Philip Deneau. Anyone who's watched us knows I'm absolutely in love with that man. I would love for them to take him, but I also know his contract's going to be very extreme. I don't know that Ron Francis is going to want to pay that either. So I'm going to throw out a name, Thomas Tatar. Here's a guy bounced around a lot, but if we know anything about him, it's that if he's playing a full season, he's going to give you 20 to 25 goals. Like, he's just automatic with that, and I think that's going to be very valuable. He's another guy you can kind of plug him into multiple spots throughout a lineup, and he's just going to give you that same level of production. So I really like Thomas Tatar. I think you can get him at a discount after last season, with whatever contract you're going to have to sign him to. So for me, I think he would be the pick.
Yeah, I mean, I would like Tatar. I mean, pardon me if I have this stat wrong. I read this the other day, but over the last 3 seasons, he is the NHL leader in expected goals for percentage in the regular season, which that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are those playoff concerns. He's been benched in the playoffs a lot, but I don't think the Kraken are the type of team that would do that. I think they'd really give him a shot, given how analytics driven they are. And I think that would be a good option. Given what there is with Jake Allen not available, I think you really can make a run at some of these UFAs like Tatar or Jeanneau, or they actually protected Armia, who's a UFA.
I know.
I think probably afraid the Kraken were going to try and sign him. That's what I would have done.
Me too.
So I think they can make a run at some of these UFAs.
Yeah, agreed.
So next is the Nashville Predators, and they are the only team to protect 5 defensemen and 3 forwards. So the 3 forwards are Philip Forsberg, Tanner Jeannot, and Luke Cunnin. And the 5 defensemen are Alexander Carrier, Matthias Ekholm, Dante Fabro, Roman Josi, and Philippe Myers, who they just acquired via trade yesterday. And the goalie, of course, is Jussi Saros. So with the protected list, I just want to shout out Tanner Jeannot, who we've had as our projected pick from the Predators. And he was not one of the bigger names, but looking at the exposed players, he's one that I really liked. Talking about Nashville's herd line of Sissons, Jeannot, and Trenin, which one of those do you take? And I felt like I had really kind of identified the best of the 3. And I guess David Poyle feels the same. So Jeannot is protected. Good for him. That's cool to be like an undrafted, rookie player, and your team only protects 3 forwards, and you're one of them. So good for him. So looking at the exposed players, because they protected 5 defensemen, we're probably going to go with a forward, I would think. And some interesting ones available. You've got Colton Sissons. You've got Kalle Järnkrok. And then, of course, the big names with big money, Matt Duchene and Ryan Johansson. So who are you thinking out of that group, Dillon?
Well, to name another name, Mikael Granlund.
That's right.
I think he's really good, but he's a UFA, and I think his asking price could be high. For me, I go Järnkrok. 1 year left on his deal, only $2 million. I think that's a steal. He's played literally every position at forward that you could, in different roles within all of those 2. Super versatile, really smart player. He's the guy for me.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I'm surprised he's available. I thought they were going to protect Järnkrok over Jeanneau, but I'm glad he is available. Like you said, versatile is the word that I would use. I mean, he's played every forward position, as you mentioned, and he always scores his 30-something points a season, and he's always very reliable defensively. You know, I've got a lot of time for a player like that, and I think, you know, any team would like a player like that in their lineup. So that is who I would go with. All right, moving on. Yeah.
And just another one of those teams where it's, you know, a bunch of dart throws.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it goes without saying we would not go for Johansson or Duchesne.
Yeah. Oh, no, I meant New Jersey that were coming up.
Oh, New Jersey. Okay,
Yeah.
moving on to New Jersey. Yeah. That's right. So, New Jersey. Yeah, you've got the dart throws. And I was really excited about New Jersey going into the season because they had, I think it was 10 eligible players that were 22 or 23 years old. And so I figure you're going to be able to take at least, you know, have at least one or two of them available to be taken. And that's pretty much what's happened. They've protected Jesper Bratt, Nico Hischier, Janne Kuokkanen, Mike McLeod, Yegor Sharangovich, Miles Wood, and Pavel Zacha at forward. Newly acquired defenseman Ryan Graves, Damon Severson, and Jonas Siegenthaler on D, and then Mackenzie Blackwood in net. So you've got those young forwards, Kuokkanen, McLeod, and Sharangovich protected. Those were three of the guys that I was thinking might be on the bubble. And on the outside of the bubble is Nate Bastian and Nick Merkley are the two forwards in that age group. Do you have a preference between the two, or is there any other name you'd look at?
I like Bastian. I just like watching him play. I think Merkley's probably got higher scoring upside. I mean, I can almost guarantee he probably has higher scoring upside, but I just like Bastian's style. Are we going to give any thought to PK Subban?
No. I mean, I know we're talking about how the money doesn't bother us if the term isn't there, and I know he just has the 1 year left, but $9 million is a lot. I mean, maybe if the Devils offered an asset, I just don't think they're in a position to do that because I don't think they feel the urgency to clear that money up right now. No. So, I mean, given the other options, I mean, you know, Bastian I think can be a useful player for you, or, you know, Merkley could also. I don't think it's worth passing up on that to go for Subban, who, while he would be great, absolutely great off the ice, you know, for an expansion team, I just, especially with how deep the Kraken could be at defense, I just don't know that he would help you as a regular in the lineup.
I think it all depends on how aggressive they want to be year one. If they want to try to make a deep playoff run year one, I think he's a guy you consider. Just because, I mean, he has playoff experience. He's, again, another guy that's, you know, a reliable, you know exactly what you're getting out of him. You're going to get like 40 points out of him every year, regardless of anything else. I think he's the guy that could teach a guy like Jake Bean a lot. I think they're very similar as far as playing style. So, you know, that's also something to consider with some of these higher-priced, older players. But I don't know. It like I said, it depends. If I'm feeling like I want to be aggressive as Ron Francis, I think I would take him.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I would want some kind of asset, something to entice me to do it. Which maybe they give up something small and it could be worth it. So next is the New York Islanders, who had a couple head scratchers here with their protection list, ones that I was surprised by, particularly at forward. On defense, it was what we thought. But they've got Matt Barzal, Anthony Beauvillier, Cal Clutterbuck, André, Matt Martin, Brock Nelson, J.G. Pajot at forward, and then Mayfield, Pelech, and Pulak on D, and then Varlamov in net. But Clutterbuck and Matt Martin protected at forward. So I know the Islanders have their identity, and, you know, they're a grinding team. I mean, those guys really fit with what the Islanders do, but it does leave Jordan Eberle and Kiefer Bellows exposed. And those are two guys that I did think would be protected. So now that they're going to be options for the Kraken, we really have to consider that. Eberle and Bellows are different. Eberle is 31. He's got some more time on his contract, so we've got that term, but he's still a very useful player. Kiefer Bellows, on the other hand, is younger. He's 23. You've got the upside there, and he's cheaper. What direction are you thinking of going now from the Islanders?
Yeah, my gut reaction is to go Kiefer Bellows. I think you go for that higher upside just because you're looking at 3 years left on Eberle's deal at 5.5 per. I mean, that's kind of the reason, we said we wouldn't want to take Josh Bailey before, who's also available. I just think, I think they exposed those guys because they've clearly zeroed in on what they want their identity to be, and they protected the guys that are most important to that, and then they know beyond that they're only going to have to lose one of them, right? But I would lean towards Kiefer Bellows.
Agreed. And, like we were talking about, it's salary plus term. Mm-hmm. And especially, on the wrong side of 30, while I really do like Eberle as a player and, and what he brings now, I just think by the end of that contract, it's not going to necessarily look good. And I like Bellows' upside. They're going to leave a prospect like that exposed. Go for it. Now that you mention it, though, I do think the identity guys like Clutterbuck and Martin. Even if the Kraken weren't all that interested in bringing those guys in, I think there would have been a lot of interest around the league if Seattle wanted to flip them. I think a lot of GMs are looking at how the Islanders play and what they're doing in their playoff runs, and they think, I want some of that. I want some of that grit, some of that bottom six energy on my team, and they'd probably be willing to pay Seattle a premium to get one of those two guys. So I do understand it, although it's going to leave the Islanders, maybe losing a good player.
Yeah.
All right. So next, the other New York team, New York Rangers, and there wasn't a whole lot to choose from with the Rangers to begin with. 6 of their 7 forward spots were, foregone conclusions. Just about anyone useful was either exempt or protected. But the one thing I didn't see coming with that last forward protection spot is they protect Kevin Rooney over Colin Blackwell. And I like Colin Blackwell. I'll just say that I had him on the projected roster initially, and then he was playing so well that I figured he'd played his way into protection. But apparently not. Blackwell is a former 7th round pick who's been a late bloomer and played his way into the NHL. He's 28. He's only 5'9", 190, so he's a shorter player. But man, he's versatile. You can put him anywhere in the lineup. The Rangers were doing just that. He kind of cycled everywhere from the first to fourth lines. He was on their second unit power play, playing that high slot kind of role. He's good at deflections, kind of being the bumper guy on the power play. That's where I would go from the Rangers, especially with the lack of other options. Julien Gauthier is there. He's a former Ron Francis first-round pick. But I like Blackwell. So, Dylan, what are you thinking?
I like Blackwell a lot, too. They didn't protect Barclay Goodrow.
Well, he's a UFA.
Yeah, but still, you just traded assets to get him. You clearly want him as part of your, right. We're contending now and we're going to make the playoffs thing. But what I'm thinking is, again, we just saw over the last 2 years what he can do in the playoffs. If you're Ron Francis, you're thinking, hey, we can make the playoffs
what? I
this year.
didn't think of that. Because if you're going to, with Tampa, you obviously aren't going to go and try and negotiate a deal with him and make him your pick from Tampa. It's just not worth it, given the other guys available. But with the Rangers, you're not really passing up on a whole lot. I like Blackwell, but go in and negotiate with Goodrow. I did see rumored yesterday that it seemed like the Rangers and Goodrow had made a lot of progress on a deal, and maybe they have something they were just waiting for after the expansion draft. But I have a hard time believing it would happen that quickly.
And also, if you're Goodrow, how sold are you on the Rangers? Could you just sign that same deal with Seattle?
Right.
You've only been there 2 days. So
Seattle, see what they're offering, use it as a bargaining chip,
Right.
You're good at pointing out these UFAs that I forget. I tend to have the UFAs not on my radar because with the projected roster, we haven't been doing the UFAs. But keep bringing them up if they're relevant. I didn't think about Goodrow, but he could be a good option there.
Yeah, I mean he's who I would take. I think you could pay him, you know, up to $3 million probably if the term is right. If it's going to be a 2 or 3 year deal, I would like that for Seattle because I think yeah you're going to be competing for a playoff spot. That's a guy I want on my playoff team.
Yeah, I would be very happy with that. Moving on to the Ottawa Senators. And they have a lot of younger guys who were exempt from the expansion draft. Um, so their protected list, they've got Drake Batherson, Connor Brown, Logan Brown, Nick Paul, Brady Tkachuk, Austin Watson, Colin White, Thomas Chabot, Victor Mete, Nikita Zaitsev, and Philip Gustafson in net. Exposed players, I mean, you do have a few guys who, could maybe be useful NHLers. You've got Chris Tierney,
Mm-hmm.
Evgeny Dadonov, Ryan Dzingel, or maybe he's a UFA, I'm not sure. And then in goal, you have some options. You have Joey Dacord, who's a prospect they signed out of Arizona State. And we knew in net it would be one of Dacord or Gustafson. I thought Dacord was going to get the nod, but they're so close.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he might be one to look at. Kind of who stands out for you, Dylan, on this list?
Um, to me, I really like Chris Tierney. I think you can bring him in. He's going to be depth down the middle. I think he's going to be an interesting guy, maybe a change of scenery, and depending on how much playing time he's going to have access to, I think he's got good upside potential. And again, it's you're only committing a year to him. If things don't work out, you just don't re-sign him and you let him walk as a free agent. But it's only a $3.5 million cap hit. I think that's worth the gamble on Tierney because I think he's got the upside of being a middle six center that's pretty effective.
Right. And I like him too. I mean, I watched him, a lot when he was at the San Jose Sharks. And I think he was given too defensive of a role this
Mm-hmm.
season, as I've said before. That's kind of not where he's supposed to be. I think you need to put him with a couple talented line mates, and he can be a good distributor. And I think the Kraken, looking at who's available, will have the option to do that. So if they see a role for him, that would be good. If not, I wouldn't mind even like going with Dacord or just having another goalie prospect to bring in.
Yeah,
Or I would stay away from Dadonov. I just think with the contract,
yeah,
you
me
know,
too.
you don't want to get in on that.
Wrong side of 30 as well.
Yes, exactly. So I would stay away, and I think the Sens know that. Um, yep. So moving on to the Philadelphia Flyers, who have had some interesting movement here with their
Mm.
protection list over the last couple days. So they make that big blockbuster trade to acquire Ryan Ellis from the Nashville Predators, giving up Philippe Myers and Nolan Patrick to do so. So Myers and Ellis just kind of moving in the same protection spot. So on defense, that's where we're going. But at forward, we figured that trading away Nolan Patrick, it opens up another protection spot. And it was rumored that that was going to go to James Van Riemsdyk. But no, surprise this morning, it turns out they protected Nicholas Aube-Kubel instead of JVR. I know. I wanted Aube-Kubel so bad. Even if JVR was available, I'm like, well, that's the guy you go. I love what he brings as a bottom six forward. The motor, the work rate, that sort of thing. And he's got some scoring upside too. But he will not be available to the Kraken. The Flyers are just daring the Kraken to take a big contract. Absolutely daring them to do it. You've got JVR, you've got Voracek, you've got Gostisbehere available. I think JVR is probably the only one that they're not going to have to pay the Kraken to take, potentially.
I agree.
But, I mean, it just comes down to do you take JVR or not.
Right, and you know what? I think you do. I know it's a $7 million cap hit, but it's only 2 seasons, and I think he's getting older. He's 32 now, but I think over an 82 game season, you can kind of cherry pick where you put him into your lineup. I think he's going to be plenty effective. I think you're going to see him back to scoring 25 goals a season, and providing kind of some veteran leadership that I don't think he gets enough credit for. So I would go ahead and go JVR.
Yeah, given what's available, I think that's what I would do. And the term isn't so, it's 2 years.
Mhm.
I don't think he's going to fall off that much in 2 years. And yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the way to go, especially since the alternative now, it's not a player that I like Obey Kubel. I mean, there's really not a whole lot left exposed now if you're not going with JVR or making a side deal for, for Voracek or Gostisbehere.
Yeah,
I want to see what the Flyers would offer in a side deal for Gostisbehere.
I do too. Because I could see Gostisbehere being a potential buyout candidate if you're them, or they could just waive him again. Like
Yeah.
that, I think that's
Either he turns it around with Hackstall because Hackstall was able to get the best
Right.
out of him immediately, or you buy him out and it's not so bad.
Yeah. But yeah, with JVR, just real quick, I think his playing style is one that we've seen has aged well. One of the things you can't teach is goal scoring. One of the things that doesn't really go away with age is your shot, right? We see that from a lot of players. So I think for someone like JVR, I think 2 years from now at 34, I think he'll roughly be the same player he is now.
Right. And I mean, he had one of his best seasons, now at age 32. So
Yeah.
you're right. I think it could age well. Next is the Pittsburgh Penguins, who had some interesting movement before the protection lists were due. They traded Jared McCann, and it seemed like they were doing that so they could protect Brandon Tanev. That was the rumor. But they're leaving Brandon Tanev exposed. They protected Teddy Bluger, Jeff Carter, Sidney Crosby, Jake Gensel, Kasperi Kapanen, Evgeny Malkin, and Brian Rust at forward. And then Brian Dumoulin, Chris Letang, and then Mike Matheson on D. It was rumored yesterday it was going to be Mark Friedman, but it's Mike Matheson. And then they've protected their most valuable goaltender, Tristan Jarry, as their goalie.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I don't mind the Jarry thing. Like if the Kraken want to take DeSmith, let them. They're passing up on the player. But the real head scratcher here is Jeff Carter, who I thought they would leave exposed because he's been really picky about where he wants to play, and I figured he'd just retire if going to Seattle, right?
I agree. That was my understanding of things. Obviously, it's not like I know Jeff Carter. I haven't asked him about it, but yeah, I mean that was certainly the feeling everyone had. Obviously something must be different behind the scenes that we're not thinking of, or they were just worried that Carter looked really good going there last year, and they just didn't even want to take the chance of potentially losing him. So.
Yeah.
That and
no, I guess. I mean, he was that good for them. I understand the need to protect him. So I guess maybe we just there was a misunderstanding about what the situation was there, and whether he'd be willing to go or not.
Maybe Ron Francis was asking for something to not take him too, and the Penguins didn't want to potentially give up an asset. I don't know.
Right.
That he'd be an odd player for that situation to develop around, but we've seen a lot of weird things in the NHL throughout the years. So. So yeah, I guess one of the things, and we had a long debate over text messages the other day, was Brandon Tanev, who's a player, I very much like his style. I think he's, one of those quote unquote heart and soul guys that does a lot for you in the playoffs. Obviously the contract is not great, $3.5 mil cap hit for 4 more years is a lot for a guy that you're basically saying we just got to get to the playoffs and then we're going to put him in the lineup. But looking at who's available from the Penguins, in my mind, it's him or it's Zach Aston Reese.
Right, I agree. It's got to be one of those two. Aston Reese, he's a good bottom six forward, defensively responsible. Kind of underrated in that way. And then Tanev brings that kind of edge and that playoff nastiness that you need. I still wouldn't touch that contract with 4 years left at 3.5 for who is a bottom six guy on the wrong side of 30. But we had a debate about this yesterday, and I can see the other side of it. You made some good points about why it might not be so bad, but I still wouldn't touch that contract.
Yes, and for those, because I saw this on Twitter yesterday too about Cody Ceci. Go back and watch the tape of Cody Ceci in last year's playoffs, because some of those bad goals that are attributed to Jari, and certainly Jari didn't do himself any favors on some of them, but there's a couple of those that are direct misplays or missed coverages by Cody Ceci. I want Seattle to stay away from him personally.
Yes, no, do not take Cody Ceci.
I know he's a name people recognize, but there's a reason he's bounced around so much in his young career.
Yeah, that's been the main selling point with him for a while, I think, is that he's a name people recognize. Yeah. All right, on to the San Jose Sharks, and no real surprises from them in their protected list. You've got Rudolph Balcers, Logan Couture, Jonathan Dahlen, Tomas Hertl, Evander Kane, Kevin Labanc, Timo Meyer, Brent Burns, Erik Karlsson, Mark-Edward Vlasic, and the newly acquired goalie Adin Hill, who we will not be getting on their protected list. As far as players exposed, you've got Martin Jones, who's probably the most valuable player here if you're trying to tank, but I don't think the Kraken will be doing that year one. You've got Ryan Donato, who hasn't really found a place in the lineup with Boston, Minnesota, or San Jose, but there's still some talent there. I mean, he's got some offensive talent. What gives me pause there is he's an RFA, but that qualifying offer at $1.9 million might be more than the Kraken want to give for that kind of player. You've got Bonnie Lake, Washington native, Dillon Gambrell, who signed a one-year extension at $1.1 million this past week, which is a little expensive, I think, he's pretty much a fourth-line center at this point. But it'd be cool to have a player from Washington on the roster if you don't get Tyler Johnson. So he's an option there. Anyone else, Dylan, that stands out to you?
I mean, you ran through half of the available guys anyway, but no.
Yeah, sorry, I do tend to run long on the Shark stuff.
Yeah, no, those are all the guys I was thinking of too. It's I lean Gambrell just because it's a toss up between Donato and Gambrell for me. Gambrell's cheaper. End of the day, that's my only reasoning to lean him. Advanced stats wise, he was fine. Yeah, I know the Washington thing is cool or whatever, but it's not like he's a superstar who's going to come back and be like the hometown kid coming home that everyone recognizes and gets excited over. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So not much there. On to St. Louis, and there are some very interesting options from the Blues. This is probably going to be Ron Francis' toughest decision out of the whole expansion draft, I think, as far as what to do with the Blues. Mm-hmm. So news came out a couple days ago that Vladimir Tarasenko will be left exposed by the Blues. And so, I mean, they're going to move him anyway, one way or the other. He's had some shoulder surgery issues. He's kind of lost trust in the team. That needs to end. He needs to go somewhere else. But they've left him exposed. He's got 2 years left on his deal at $7.5 million. But he's not the only good option from the Blues. Defenseman Vince Dunn is there, and I was thinking he was the no-brainer pick before the Tarasenko news broke. And he might still be the better option. He's going to come a lot cheaper. And he's just a good defenseman to have around. He showed that he can play top 4 minutes this season and excel at that. There's some other good options, Nico Mikkola, or Sammy Blais, but I really do think it comes down to Tarasenko or Dunn. Is there a particular way you're leaning there, Dylan? I know I asked you yesterday and you were kind of on the fence.
Yeah, I'm still on the fence. I love the idea of them being able to take Tarasenko. You're getting a bona fide superstar. Only 2 years left on that contract. Yes, it's a lot. It's 7.5 per, but that's manageable over 2 years if you're an expansion team. It's just that you're talking about a shoulder injury, and you're talking about potentially a shoulder surgery that didn't go well, and you're talking about a lot of things that are, shoulders and knees are super scary because those are the things that can really impact a player. I talked a little bit about it with JVR. One of the things we see with guys that have great shots, their shot doesn't really age unless they have an injury to, say, a shoulder. So
Right.
I'm really really cautious about Tarasenko. The Blues have been really good about letting anyone who has interest see the medicals on him. So I would assume Ron Francis is taking a look at that. The Kraken doctors and everybody are taking a look at that. If the doctors come back and say, look, we think everything will be fine, or we're just going to need to do this or that, and things should be okay, then I really consider taking Tarasenko, and I probably go ahead and do it if I'm Ron Francis. Otherwise, yeah, I'd probably go ahead and take Vince Dunn. You're talking about a guy, he's a UFA, but I don't think his number is going to be very big. Good defensive option. You can kind of plug him in multiple situations. Has trade value. Couple guys I will just mention. Mike Hoffman was third on their team in scoring last year. He's going to be a UFA. I don't know what his number is. That was kind of like his redemption show, just to show that he still had it after a lot of people lost faith in him. So my guess is his number is probably going to be too high for Seattle. The other guy is Jaden Schwartz, who's going to be a UFA, who has been really good in the past. We already know there's a market for him. He's another kind of sign and trade option a la Brandon Saad, in that they're really good options. I don't know that they'd want to be in Seattle, but they might use Seattle to leverage going certain places. That, and I don't think last year was indicative of what Jaden Schwartz can do, because he too kind of fell out of. He had his rough issues with the Blues organization last year, so I just want to bring those guys up. But otherwise, if the medical clears, take Tarasenko. If it doesn't, go Vince Dunn.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to the medical, and we've been worried for a while looking at the projections about finding goal scoring. That's going to be exposed, and Tarasenko and JVR, that's going to be where you find it. So if the medical comes back, as something you can work with, I think that's the direction that the Kraken should go. So on to the Tampa Bay Lightning, the defending back-to-back Stanley Cup champs, and they have exposed a lot of good forwards. They went with the 8 skater protection option, as I wasn't sure if they were going to do that. I didn't think they would go this direction, certainly not protecting Ryan McDonough. But they protected 4 forwards, Anthony Cirelli, Nikita Kucherov, Braden Point, and Steven Stamkos, and 4 defensemen, Eric Chernak, Victor Hedman, Ryan McDonough, and Mikhail Sergachev. And, of course, Andrei Vasilevsky, Conn Smythe winner, in net. But that leaves a lot of forwards available who were key to the Lightning's Stanley Cup run. You've got Yanni Gourde, you've got Ross Colton, you've got Killorn, you've got Andre Palat. And then you've got Cal Foote on defense, who's a good defense prospect. I mean, the Lightning have pretty much just said, well, you can only take one. Mm-hmm. We're going to leave a bunch of good players exposed, and we're just going to lose a good player, but we're only going to lose one good player. So I can have their pick here. I mean, who would you go with? There are so many good options.
Yeah, there's a ton of good options. Before I get into all of it, I'm just going to throw out one scenario. Let's say the Kraken draft Barclay Goodrow from the Rangers. Do you potentially go after Coleman from Tampa Bay as well? Get both of those guys in. They're the 2 big names every team wants out there right now, and you just kind of steal both of them.
Here, I go one further. I wait till UFA to try and get Coleman. So I grab Goodrow from the Rangers. I take Yanni Gourde here, the center from that line, and I try and get, and then I tell Coleman, we've got the other 2. Come back and we'll put this line back together in Seattle. That would be awesome if you could make the numbers work. That'd be great to just take one of the most important lines from the defending Stanley Cup champion and just transport it right to Seattle. So, I think you really have to think about Yanni Gourde. He would be my pick of all these guys, regardless of whether you can get Goodrow or Coleman. It's really close, but just what he brings, especially if you make the playoffs as a defensive center. We've seen the impact that a great defensive center like Gourde or Philip Deneau can have in a playoff series, just single-handedly able to shut down opposing top lines. He'd be my pick, but there are no bad picks out of these guys.
Right, barring having some really bad goaltending or something, having one of those guys almost guarantees you winning a first-round series. Like they've shown that they are that important. So I agree. I would go Yanni Gourde. Ross Colton intrigues me. The problem is he's been so buried on their depth chart that I haven't seen enough from him to feel confident that, like, yes, I can bring him in and he might be a second line type center guy and all that stuff, because the bottom line is he's only been playing like 10 minutes a night in Tampa, so it's really hard to judge.
Right, and I think you have to throw Matthew Joseph in that category as well.
Agreed, because I love them both as players. Obviously they both showed up in big moments, but and then Tyler Johnson, again, you're talking about someone local to the area, all that stuff, but I just think Yanni Gourde brings a lot more to the table. So if I'm gonna have to be paying over $5 million for a couple seasons, I'd rather have Yanni Gourde.
Right. Yep, agreed. I'm definitely looking forward to how that pick from Tampa turns out. One more thing I want to mention: how likely is it, do you think, there's a side deal involving Tyler Johnson? Because I know a lot of Kraken fans. Tyler Johnson's been a name we've all been thinking about for a while. Mm-hmm. It seemed like there might be some kind of side deal. I feel like it's almost going to be separate from the pick. Like the Kraken will make their pick, and then maybe the Lightning will throw, a pick or something to get them to take Tyler Johnson if the Kraken are interested.
I think that is, yes, a possibility. All these guys have either no trade clauses or modified no trade clauses, so that doesn't protect them from being exempt from the expansion draft, but it does mean that come a side deal separate from that, it might come into play. I'm just going to mention that I have no idea if Tyler Johnson would want to avoid going to Seattle or not. I could see I could see a side deal to keep Gourde, where they're saying, where they basically say, take one of Palat, Johnson, or Killorn, and we'll give you, a pick or something. Because I think Gourde is the only one of those guys available that if I'm Tampa, I really don't want to lose. He's the only one worth giving up an asset to keep. Whereas all those other guys are contracts that, yes, it hurts to lose the player, but losing that contract makes up for it.
Right. And I could see that. I could see a side deal like that, potentially. All right. So on to the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have, and kind of an odd approach here, given what they did yesterday. So they trade to bring in Jared McCann from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then promptly expose him, going with the 4-4-1 with the 8-skater protection option, protecting Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, William Nylander, and John Tavares at forward. Then TJ Brody, Justin Hall, Jake Muzzin, and Morgan Riley on D, and of course Jack Campbell in net. But that leaves Jared McCann exposed, as well as Alex Kerfoot, who's really been heavily rumored to go to the Kraken. I mean, it seems like we're hearing lots of stuff about Kerfoot to the Kraken. It also leaves Travis Dermott exposed. It's got to be one of those three as far as the pick.
Agreed. But if I'm Ron Francis, though, I take Jared McCann. Like, you're talking about a center who, puts up a lot of points. He put up 32 points last year, only 48 games. I think he's got a lot of upside. He was buried on the Pittsburgh depth chart. He'd be buried here in Toronto too. I think if you're Seattle, go ahead and draft him. He's got some high upside. He'll be an RFA after next year, so you'll have some team control more longer term. I don't know. I like him a lot more than Kerfoot.
Yeah, I do too. And I mean, that's what I would do. I would go with McCann. We're not sure what that next contract is going to look like, but I still think it would come out at under Kerfoot's 3.5 for another 2 years. I don't understand what the interest in Kerfoot is.
I don't either. And if it is to be more than 3.5, it's because McCann goes to Seattle and he puts up a ton of points. If he comes in and turns into like their version of William Karlsson in Vegas, then what? Yeah, you pay him, because guess what? He'll be then a 26-year-old center who's putting up top six for sure. scoring.
Right.
So
So,
yeah,
yeah,
then you
if
can
he's
pay him
real,
like
you do.
5 or something, and it's fine.
Yeah. But I just don't understand the interest in Kerfoot. I know Hackstall coached him, last year in Toronto, or the last 2 years in Toronto. I just, at that number, he's a fine player, but at 3.5 for the next 2 years, for the role he's going to play, I don't really know what they're thinking. So I would go McCann. I still think the pick is going to be Kerfoot. And maybe they have something prearranged also that Kerfoot's going to be the pick, that Dubas knows that, so he has no problem exposing McCann because Kerfoot's going to be the pick. I could see that where they just throw him a late pick, to ensure that it's Kerfoot. Because before they brought in McCann, you think it's like Kerfoot or Dermott.
Right.
And, if you can give him a pick to take Kerfoot, then you can, trade and bring in whoever you want. It doesn't matter. So there might be a side deal already in play there. That's the one thing I will take into account.
Right. And, we'd had Dermott there for a while. I just think, given the defensive options the Kraken are going to have overall, I wasn't sure how much regular playing time he was going to get. I like the contract extension he signed with Toronto.
Yes.
I think it's a very reasonable number, 1.5 over the next 2 years. It's just that I think the upside of McCann is just so great that I think if you're Seattle, you just have to go there.
Agreed. All right, on to our rivals to the north, the Vancouver Canucks, who made a last-minute trade, bringing in Jason Dickinson from the Dallas Stars. So he will be protected. They're protecting Brock Besser, Jason Dickinson, Bo Horvat, JT Miller, Tyler Mott, Tanner Pearson, Elias Pettersson, Oli Jolevi, Tyler Myers, Nate Schmidt, and Thatcher Demko. From the Canucks, how about that Tyler Myers protection? I mean, it doesn't make any kind of material difference because the Kraken are not going to take a defenseman from Vancouver, no matter who it is. But that's a nice little ego boost for Tyler Myers being protected, even though they would have had no problem exposing him.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one thing you could say about Jim Benning is he always gives you something to talk about, right?
Always, without fail. With a lot of fail, but
yeah.
But as far as the players that are available, Cole Lind stands out to me, but really you just have some dart throws, really. Cole Lind, Gadjevich, just some younger prospects that you can kind of, maybe Jalen Chatfield, Brogan Rafferty, just some guys who are probably going to play in the AHL to start, and you can see what you have in them.
Yeah, I this is one of those where I ask my pro scouts. I just go like, who do you got a feeling for? Who is the person that you can't help but watch when they're out there, and I go with them, and I trust the process, so to speak, in that way. But because otherwise there's no one that really stands out to me.
Yeah,
there's a lot of people that stand out to me, but they're people to avoid.
Right. And I think one of those is Braden Holtby, and his name has come up recently that there's been some interest in Braden Holtby at a reduced cap hit. Maybe we see something where he either goes to Seattle or is flipped somewhere else, at 50% retained. It's possible. I explored that possibility on the YouTube channel, with one of the side deals. Maybe they go that direction, but if I'm the Kraken, I just leave this alone and take whoever my pro scouts think is the guy to take.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So the Washington Capitals now, and the biggest thing, they protected TJ Oshie. I know a lot of Kraken fans were thinking about that, but at the end of the day, Oshie's just too valuable to the Capitals right now, and they're in their window. So he's not going to be a Seattle Kraken next season.
And it sounded like he wanted to stay there anyway, so.
Absolutely. It did. I mean, he said all indications that he wanted to stay. So, that plays a big role as well. So they protected Nicholas Backstrom, Lars Eller, Evgeny Kuznetsov, Anthony Mantha, Oshie, Daniel Sprong, and Tom Wilson at forward, John Carlson, Dmitry Orlov, and Trevor Van Riemsdyk on D. I thought it was going to be Justin Schultz, but it is TVR. And Ilya Samsonov in net. So Samsonov over Vanacek. And I think that's the first place we have to go with this pick is to the goalies, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Caps had two good goalies. Vanacek actually kind of acted as the starter last season,
Mm-hmm.
but he's left exposed. I mean, is that the direction you go from the Caps, or is there a skater that's kind of calling your name here instead?
Nope, that's where I go. I think you pair him with a Drieger as your goaltending tandem, and you ride the hot hand, and I don't think you can do very much wrong with that. I think that'd be a really good tandem.
Yeah, I think you hit on it. That's the goaltending tandem that I want to see. Drieger, Vanacek. I love that. Vanacek showed he can be half of a good goaltending tandem last season. And they're both young. They've got upside. I think either one of them could emerge as the starter. So, as far as skaters, they've got some really good fourth line guys in Hagelin, Nick Dowd, and Garnet Hathaway. I love the fourth line that those guys formed over the season. Like their zone starts were among like the worst in the league, and they did a great job at that. And they can score. I just, value wise, to only take one of them, I just don't think it's worth it. On defense, Brendan Dillon, I think, deserves a mention. I like he's another one of those guys that in the playoffs can kind of wear opponents down. He's not afraid to play with an edge. We haven't talked about Alex Ovechkin yet.
I mean,
he's not going anywhere. I know that deal's in the drawer, but I feel like we needed to mention that name when talking about the Capitals, at least.
Yeah.
Don't get your hopes up, Kraken fans. He's not going anywhere.
No.
I think that's just go Vanacek and have your goalie tandem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, last but certainly not least, Winnipeg.
Yes, the final team. And it seemed like they were scrambling before that roster freeze to try and do something about Mason Appleton, because they know he's got to be the guy picked, right? I mean, we talked about how valuable players like Barclay Goodrow or Blake Coleman are. I think Appleton, we're going to see very soon, is going to fall into that category if he's not already. I mean, just the energy he brings in the bottom six with the scoring upside. He's got to be the pick. It seemed like they were trying to move him, but for whatever reason couldn't get a good enough deal. He's the clear pick for me. Even though I like Dylan DeMello, he's still exposed. But Mason Appleton, welcome to Seattle, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as you said, he's got both potential top six upside scoring wise as a winger if having access to those minutes translates. But if it doesn't, guess what? You got like one of the top bottom six forwards you could ever hope to have. Like there's just no downside. What his potential downside is, and that's just him staying what he already has been, which has been fantastic. So, for that role. But he's someone, we talked about throughout the year, as we both think he's got the upside that if given the opportunity, we could see him put up some numbers that surprise some people.
Absolutely. And as far as like where he fits in, I mean, knowing that you already have the opportunity to get Yanni Gourde and, maybe another piece, if you can get 2/3 of that Tampa third line and just plug in Appleton, I mean, he'll fit in seamlessly.
Yeah, it would be scary. It'll be super scary come playoff time. I mean, there's no one on this list. There's, a couple names on D that I think are good players, but no one that tops Appleton for me.
Yeah, for sure. So there it is. We've run through all 30 teams. And let's look at this just from an overall perspective. I mean, there were clearly some surprises in the last couple days. The projected roster and kind of what we think looks very different than it did a week ago. Overall, Dylan, how are you feeling?
I feel pretty good. I've been worried all along. I've said it before on some of our YouTube videos. I've said it to you privately that GMs kind of learn their lesson from the Vegas thing, and they're going to make moves, and there's not going to be as many potential side deals for Seattle, and there's not going to be as many good players exposed for Seattle. And as things were developing yesterday, I was really worried again because you're seeing names fly all over the place. But after the dust cleared, there's a lot of good stuff available for Seattle still. I feel good about this team. Again, we'll say, you know, it would be a competitive team anyway, but in this division, we are playing with a bunch of really bad teams. There is no reason to not think that Seattle's going to at least be contending for a playoff spot. I never want to, try to say, oh, it's guaranteed, certainly this far out, but, they have a really good shot at making the playoffs. And then depending on who they draft, we brought up a lot of guys that have shown they're very valuable come playoff time. So I'm really excited. I'm a lot more optimistic now than I have been. Now that it's actually here. I've always been very cautious about things. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but now I start to get those juices flowing, and I'm really getting excited.
Agreed. And I've looked at the projections a lot, since we've put them out, and I really have to say this is the most optimistic I've been about what this team's going to be throughout the whole process, which I did not think was going to be the case. Mm-hmm. There were just some surprises as far as who was left available, and I think you said you don't want to say playoffs are guaranteed, and I don't either, but I think they should be the expectation at this point. No one's available. I think that should absolutely be the expectation. Is playoffs in year one, and if they get there, they're going to have a lot of guys that have shown they can be valuable once they get there, like you said. Now, I mean, the big decision point, basically, that I see for Ron Francis is he has basically a slider that he can choose how much he wants to slide it toward contending right away versus, as he likes to say, sustainable success. And I don't think you're going to have to choose one or the other. I don't think it's mutually exclusive, but I think there's a spectrum there. And given who's available, he can choose to go just about anywhere on that spectrum. I think he has given guys like Tarasenko, JVR, heck, even like Carey Price, even though he shouldn't do it. He's got more ability than I thought he would have to try and contend right away. And even maybe more temptation to do that given how weak the Pacific is going to be. And on the other side, due to a flat cap environment, how valuable salary cap space is, and we're seeing that, he also, and plus the next two draft classes are going to be really good. Mm-hmm. He has probably even more temptation to go the other way and try and build for the future. And it'll just be really interesting to see which direction he could go, because you see what could be available, but yeah, I think we really don't have a good indication of which direction he could go just because there's so strong a pull on either side.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. It's going to be interesting. I think the only thing you can say is not available to them is, a starting center, top line center, but there's only really 12 of them in the whole league, it seems like. So, the odds that any of them were going to be exposed was slim and done anyway. But when that's the only glaring hole you can say about what this roster could look like is something that a lot of existing rosters could also say is their problem, right? That's a huge deal. And I think, much like with Vegas, this could be a team that surprises people.
Absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see, what they do in the coming days.
Yeah, less than a week away. It's time to get really excited. I guess real quick, do you have a preference? Win now or sustainable success? I know I'm putting you on the spot. I'm only doing that so I don't have to answer first.
Right. I mean, I think if he plays his cards right, Ron Francis is not going to have to choose. I think he can go somewhere in the middle and have a team that is comfortably in a playoff spot, with the potential to do a little bit more, but then also not sacrifice any of those future assets. I really do think he's going to be able. That's going to be where the skill is going to have to give you some opportunities. That's what's going to separate a good GM from a great GM. Is not just can you choose one or the other, but can you find a way to get both? Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be possible for Ron Francis to do that. So this is going to be the test. He's going to, we're going to find out how good of a GM he really is. And I'm excited to see what he's able to come up with.
Yeah, me too. I think there is a sweet spot in the middle. I think we kind of touched on it a lot today, just with our picks, um, and it's going to be fun to see come Wednesday. All right, so thanks for joining us, everybody. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at Emerald City HKY. It's the same on Instagram. Check out the YouTube channel, Emerald City Hockey. You can now find us on all of the podcasting platforms, Emerald City Hockey Podcast. And we will see you all later.